This is Koro Nakamura, a professor, the director of School of Art and Design at San Diego State University. This is a lecture, part of the lecture in the Inclusive Cities Conference titled Design for Resilience. I will talk about my experience going to the aftermath of the devastating tsunami in Japan that occurred in 2011. The first experience I have to share with you is that I went there to help their recovery, and my expertise as an architect, provide design services and raise funds to rebuild whatever we can rebuild. That notion of support was completely wrong. And after I arrived there, talking to survivors, I realized that the outsiders like us looking into the disaster zone, that idea is, however the well-intentioned, often it is not useful. The tsunami occurred on the off coast of the eastern Japan. As many of you have seen, the large tsunami, about 7 meters high, devastating the coastline of Japan. 400,000 structures were destroyed, and 16,000 people lost their lives that day. What's happening at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant is famous and or infamous, and the evacuation zone still exists, and contamination still continues. It was like this when I arrived. Water is there, that's seawater. Does not drain because the land sunk by about 70 centimeters. And also this area of Japan moved to the east about 30 meters that day. The boat, large boat, were pushed by the force of the tsunami about 1 kilometer into the shore, and they had a plan to preserve this ship as a monument to that day, the monument to the survivors. But the community decided to demolish it since it is too painful to see the evidence of that disaster every day. The port was destroyed. This was especially a problem because this is one of the major seaport, and a large amount of the fish are downloaded in this port, and so the port was destroyed, meaning that their economical base was destroyed. This chart shows the idea of resilience. Prior to stress, it was normal business taking place. Then the stress is applied. Everything started deteriorating until it hits a breaking point. If it hits the breaking point, it will not come back. And then the somewhere it stops. In this case, the tsunami receded the next day. Emergency workers and the military came in and start setting up the emergency response stations, emergency lodging, food, drink, and medicine. And all that is done. Temporary solutions applied, longer term housing, and ways to supply food, and the water, and the medicine. So that's the recovery process. Then the final solution is the long-term resilience. Long-term recovery is the permanent living places, and survivors will recover their livelihood, so they don't have to rely on the government anymore. That takes a long time and also costs government and the people a lot of funds to do so. As you can see here, the qualitative resilience is the quantity divided by time. The longer the time, the quality deteriorates, and there are some evidences of that. This is the information collected by National Broadcasting System called NHK in Japan, comparing the first year and the second year living conditions. As you can see here, first 1, 2, 3, 6 items: less sleep, depression, alcohol, tobacco, medication, and lack of mobility, lack of motivation. All that went up somewhere between 6 to 9%, meaning that the longer the recovery takes, the living condition deteriorates. So it is better if we can resolve these issues faster, and that's not what happened at this devastated area. Government placed a moratorium and tried to develop a consensus for the future plans of the destroyed neighborhood. It took almost 3 years to just come up with a plan. Meanwhile, the government started building these huge walls. The government approach to the recovery of cities is to construct something. And a large wall of tsunami came, so that the strong concrete wall will protect the cities. So they have that kind of very simple ideas of recovery. Also, this was their way of bringing the money into the community, because the economy stopped, the port was destroyed. So only way to bring the jobs into the community was to build something, and that's what they built, and has been building using the tax money they raised after the tsunami. So the anatomy of recovery is very complex. As I went there, I had a very simple idea about how the recovery will happen. Then I understood it's very complex, and I had to draw this diagram. The top 3 are government, and the bottom are people. And the government's approach to the recovery is to clean it up and rebuild. And that's all they do. And often they ignore the community's wishes and environmental impact. The environmental impact assessment studies were exempt when the projects are considered as a recovery from the disaster, meaning that it is just bringing back what it was before. And often, just like the large wall you just saw, it's not the recovery, but still the environmental assessment was ignored. So to bring back the community back to the strength of prior to the stress takes more than just a construction. We need to consider the people back, and people back meaning the communities back. So I experienced talking to the city officials. Small cities are not equipped to deal with this type of large-scale disaster and the construction and the recovery. They were not trained, or that they even experienced something like this before. So they had to rely on the city, state, and federal government. And their approaches, as I mentioned before, clean it up and construct. And that's not what people needed. Large scale of debris were piled up in the street side, and they couldn't recycle these organic materials, mainly wood, that they were contaminated by heavy metals, and also there was a danger of the nuclear radiation contamination. So they had to build their own plant to remove those the metals and radiation. The reconstruction of the port started almost immediately. State government started doing this because they understood that if there's no fish, there's no economy. There's no economy, there's no recovery. So they were quick about starting this construction. Also, they started raising the ground, and this was to build the factory. The fishing industry requires refrigeration plants and other facilities as the fish come back to the port. So without the support facilities, there is no economy. Cities placed a moratorium for construction in the flood zones. So any of those buildings destroyed by the tsunami, they were not allowed to rebuild anything until the moratorium was lifted, which took about 3 years. And this house was being built about 1 year after the tsunami. This was allowed because the land was higher and out of the flood zone. The communities understood people's needs much more than cities and the state and the federal government. This is one NPO called I forgot the name of it, but anyway, at the Rikuzen Takata city, and they provided information of the community because people don't know where their family and neighbors are, and also provided the materials needed by the community. So you can see here the city, state, and the federal government were thinking about the rebuilding. These people are thinking about the people's mental health and the rebuilding the communities. Young people like these came back from Tokyo because there are no education, there are no employment in this neighborhood. So young people leave and live in the community as elderly community. And these people came back after the disaster and start talking about creating a new industry like farming and forestry. And these are the people who will live in this area and create the future of the community. But the older people are more interested in just rebuilding what it was before. It is not their concern to see 10 years, 20 years into the future. And the ladies of the communities were strong. These are fishermen's wives and the business people. And they got together and talked about their feelings about the recovery. They are willing to rebuild this neighborhood, but also they are sensitive to the younger generation's needs as well. This lady, business lady, she had the financial power to rebuild their building and restart her business, but she decided not to. The reason was her children were in Tokyo, and because, as I mentioned before, there are no education opportunity or the employment opportunity in this neighborhood. So she decided not to build and retire and live in a government-provided apartment building. They built these temporary housing. These are construction workers, temporary housing used in Japan. They were assembled quickly and creates the adequate living environment. They were available and they were ready to go, so Japanese government rented these to build the temporary structure. People lived in this structure for 3 years or so, and it's we call it 4 walls and the wall on the roof, but mental health become a major issue living in this type of condition for too long. Some communities defied the city's rules and decided to reconstruct their own community. This is one of them, and city created this lottery system to place people to temporary housing. The problem with that system was that some of the neighbors are sent to faraway cities to live in temporary housing. This community said no, we will live together in a nearby temporary housing. City was very upset, and they are trying to squish this group, but this group went to the mass media, and they were able to maintain the community together in this complex. There are also, you can see some of the maps and stuff on the back. They're also thinking about recreating the permanent housing in this neighborhood. The problem is it's going to be a funding mix of the public housing and the private funded housing. And in one property, you cannot build those two different funding sources together. So the city is again saying, no, you cannot do that. And these people are determined to rebuild their community together and live together instead of apart. So the takeaway from this lecture is the construction is secondary to the recovery. What we need to rebuild is their family, their friends, their workmates, and their community. And that becomes the reason for recovery. And without the reason to recover, people don't need to stay here. They can go away, go to Tokyo, and this community will disappear. So it is much more important to think about the people's relationships instead of construction. Thank you for listening.